Hey, what's up guys? BJ Dell back with a new Let's Draw video all about how to add backgrounds to your design. Today's video I'm going to walk you through a jungle design using some really basic shapes to show you how you can just kind of layer some simple ideas to make a convincing background pretty quickly. So if you want to learn all about that and more, keep watching. Right guys, so let's go ahead and get started. Like I said, this video is all about adding backgrounds to your images. This video is going to be pretty simple. Taking this design, this is a leopard that I had previously done. I did this on another canvas, just kind of flattened the image and merged it and just brought it in with the copy and paste feature just as a flat. So this is all one layer here. There's no separate layer for lines or shadows or anything. It's all flat. I'm using the iPad Pro 12.9 inch first gen model along with Procreate. But honestly, this is just going to be showing you my design kind of thoughts and how I approach a background design. It's going to be pretty quick, pretty simple. This is obviously a cartoon design, so it's not going to be super realistic, and I'm going to show you basically how to use some pretty simple shapes to build up a background fairly quick. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to go ahead and make a new layer here, and this is going to be my sketch layer for doing the background. I'm going to drop it behind this first layer, and I usually use the blue color just to kind of sketch. Obviously, this is going to be a jungle scene since we've got the leopard here, so I'm going to go ahead and start laying this in. I think this front area here in the foreground, this is going to basically be a kind of like a dirt area he's sitting in. So I'm going to go ahead and just kind of knock that in real quick. Now with these sketches, I usually go in pretty quick and dirty on the sketch. I don't really worry about making everything perfect. I just kind of like to build it up to know exactly where everything goes. I'll go back in and kind of fine tune when I go back in and do the inking. So go ahead and throw a rock in here. Basically my idea with this is, and a lot of times with backgrounds, is to throw a lot of stuff and build up the background pretty quickly so it has a lot of overlapping elements. It kind of lets you get away with doing stuff not super detailed. So we'll have like some grass coming in here. Since this is the jungle, we'll have like a leaf coming in this way here. It's going to be like one of those fronds that have the cuts out of them. So we'll go ahead and cut these in like this. And start to just kind of bring these in like so. Do the same thing with this one. That looks pretty good there. So let's go ahead and we'll add some different types of leaves over here. Like this. And then this background here, I think I kind of want like some bushes. So with bushes, I usually draw just these kind of swooping, kind of ellipses, I guess, to give the almost like a shadow or a kind of like a silhouette of the bush rather than adding in, you know, a bunch of details to it. And then I'm going to draw another row of bushes behind that one. And then when we go back in to color this in, you'll see with these bushes, I will actually go in and do these a little bit darker so that it breaks everything up. I think I'm going to do another like short row just down here, like so. Okay. So from here, I'm going to go ahead and add some mountains in here behind. Let's do that. Like I said, these are just really simple. You can see I'm just using basic triangle shapes with these. And just throwing that kind of snow cap there because they're off in the distance. And then let's draw a sun over here. Let's go ahead and draw, let's do some clouds. Clouds, I like to go really cartoony. I usually do just a flat straight line here and then kind of do these big swooping circles that kind of trail off and get smaller as you go down. It just looks fun. And then since it is the jungle too, let's go ahead and do some vines coming down. We're not going to be able to see where these are coming from. They're just hanging down from above. So we'll throw those in there. kind of want them the same thickness here, so get those there, and then these will have some little leaves coming off of them. As you can see, as I'm adding the stuff in, I'm kind of being careful to not overlap too much of, say, the mountains. So these vines are going to come in and they're not going to overlap these top parts of the mountains. I still want those visible. And same thing with these leaves, kind of positioning them to kind of fill in the gaps where there's not other stuff at. Same thing up here. Okay, so as you can see, that's the pretty quick just sketch layout of everything. So I'm going to go ahead and drop the opacity of this because we're going to draw over top. So we'll bring this down here. And then let's go ahead and on the cat itself, I don't know if you can tell, but I did not use a solid black outline. I used this darker brown. So I'm going to go ahead and hold down and color select that because I want to use that same color for the outline of the background. And I'm actually going to turn off the cat right now just for a second here. And we're going to go ahead and start a new layer here and then start kind of adding this stuff in. So like I said, this is where I get a little bit more refined with the line work. It's also important too, especially in this case, the fact that I brought in a already completed design, so to speak. You really need to pay attention, especially using, line weights. And then of course, once we go to shadows and highlights, this already has the light source pretty much defined. So we've got the shadows over here, the highlights here. So this light source is coming in this way. So we need to make sure that the line weights and the shadows and the highlights are properly reflected in our background as well. So we'll have to pay attention to that as we go along. And you'll see here too with these, this is why I turned the cat itself off. A lot of these aren't going to connect because the cat's in front, but I do want them to connect because it's going to make filling these in a lot easier. So I'm just going to go ahead and just do some really basic lines to connect them. I don't want them to be, too perfect. No reason to take the time if they're going to be hidden behind the cat. So that's going to make that drag and drop fill-in feature a lot quicker. If you try to do it when they're not connected, it's just going to fill in everything. So now when we go to fill this in, it's going to fill it in properly. Get these leaves in here. As you can see, this is pretty basic. There's not a ton of detail to this. Once we get to the end though, and you see it colored in and with the highlights and shadows, it looks like a finished piece. Of course, like I said, with it not being too detailed and being cartoony, you really need to match up, the background styles to the main focus of the design. So if you've got a character in here that's, super realistic, obviously this wouldn't be the best bet, but I keep a lot of my stuff cartoony, as I'm sure a lot of you guys do too from seeing different posts in the Facebook group. So this is definitely kind of a tutorial that focuses on that. It's kind of geared toward that style of art. If you guys do work, super realistic, of course, you can maybe get some advice or tips as far as just general layout, but the actual work put into it to get the overall colors and the finished product is going to be quite a bit different when it comes down to it. So and with doing stuff like this too, it's kind of nice because with everything being pretty simplistic and basic, stuff like this, you really don't need a lot of, references to look at. Once you get pretty good at, drawing, once you've drawn leaves a few times, when you've drawn, mountains or these little bush shapes here, it comes pretty second nature, so you can kind of throw them in as needed. And It'll kind of streamline your work because you're not really doing a whole lot of research on the overall, you know, reference photos and what you want everything to look like. So speeds up the process, makes things a little bit more kind of organic too, and a little bit more your own, which is kind of nice. So we've got all those matched up there, and we're going to do the same thing here. Now you'll see I'm going over top of these vines here, and the reason for that is because we are going to actually make another line layer for those. When you have stuff overlapping like that, things you've already done, and I've talked about this in past videos too, it's so much easier than trying to go back through and erase everything and not touch that line that you don't want to erase. So much easier just to make a new line layer, and then that way you can go back in and remove stuff super fast and super easy. So let's go ahead and get these mountains in. I'm just going to actually do the shape tool for this. You'll see by holding down the pencil and not lifting up, it actually locks in that triangle shape, which is really nice. Make stuff really quick. Alright, so that's pretty good there. Let's go ahead and get the sun in here. And let's make a new layer now. I'm going to go ahead and do the clouds first. So let's get those in there. Now the part that overlaps, I can go back into these mountains and just start to erase that. You see this does not affect the clouds that I just did at all, and it makes everything super fast and easy. I think I am going to pull up this line here a little bit though, because I don't like the way that it hits the clouds. It looks a little off. Let's go back in here, just do a quick erase, just pull it up just a tad, so everything's still separated pretty nicely. Go ahead and do the clouds back here now. These I'm going to have actually behind the mountain. I'll go ahead and erase that part so that shows up behind. So that looks pretty good there. Last thing I want to do is do a new layer again. We'll combine these now that we're done with those. So we just pinch and pull those together. That merges those, and then we'll go ahead and do these vines. Now with the vines, I'm going to make the underside thicker just because of the line weight and the shadows. And then once again, I'm going to make a new layer. Since these overlap, it'll make erasing a heck of a lot easier. And this, I'm trying to be mindful of that mountain there. I don't want the top totally blocked out by that vine, so I'll just erase this overlap here, and then we can go ahead and go back down to the mountain layer and erase all these overlaps. See, with this, it is kind of obscured there, so you can still see the tip of it, but it's just solid, and I'd like to get some color in there rather than having it just be the outline. So I'll probably go back in there and pull that up just a little bit. And of course here, and then I'm going to have to match up the thickness of the outline on this side. So there we go. Now it's raised up and we can see it a little bit better. And then the last thing I need to do is just add those leaves in here that are on the vines. And once again here, I'm trying to get the underside of them a little bit thicker, this backside, just since that's for a line weight principle where the shadow is going to be. So that line, if you're trying to vary your line weight, that line should be the thicker of the two. Does a lot of shadow work without actually adding in the shadows yet. Like I said, the whole idea with this is just kind of filling up the canvas so you've got a believable background that has a lot going on. It looks finished, it looks full, but as you can see, I mean, this is going pretty quick. If this was a full-on illustration that I was doing for, say, a children's book or a client or something like that, I would probably take a little bit more time, but it's just nice to be able to go in and knock out stuff like this fairly quick. So let's go ahead and turn the cat back on here. And then the last thing I want to do is draw a few of these little rocks or pebbles down here. This kind of gives it the illusion of, you know, being dirt or ground, and then just a couple of dots here and there to add some textures to it. Okay, so it looks pretty good. So we're going to go ahead and start adding in our color flats now. So we've got our main cat layer, we've got our lines. We're going to go under here, add a new layer underneath our lines. This is going to be our color flats. And then our lines, we actually want those set to reference. So if you click that, go to reference. That's going to allow us to drag and drop fill colors onto that bottom layer. So let's go ahead and get a brown here for the ground. Maybe a little bit lighter. You want to pay attention to, you know, what the color is sitting against. That brown was a little bit too close to the hues of the cat itself, so I wanted something a little bit lighter. And let's go ahead and grab a gray for this rock over here. I think I'm going to fill these in with that gray as well. I don't want these to pop out too much. I want them to kind of blend in. So you see them there, but you don't necessarily, you know, think about looking at them. This and go a little bit darker for this extra line here that separates everything. Now we can go in for the leaves and the grass. So everything that's in the foreground, I want it to be a lighter green, and everything is going to get darker as it moves back. Of course, you can go darker with your shadows and highlights, or of course your shadows, but I prefer just to do it on the color flats. That allows me to still have that one shadow layer that I can add a little bit more shadows to it. So we're going to go pretty bright up front here. Remember, these are leaves that are coming out, as well as these. And then our first actual row of bushes are going to be these. So let's drop this down a little bit darker. And then let's go a little bit darker still for the row behind that. And then a little bit darker still for the final row. So as you can see, they don't blend together. You can actually tell that, you know, they are separated, and they appear to be, you know, going back in the distance since the colors change. So that's kind of what we wanted, that look. And then we'll add more to it as we go along too with the shadows and highlights to make it pop even more. Let's go and get this sky filled in here. Go ahead and do the sun. Go ahead and do the clouds. And the mountain range, I want those kind of to be a grayish brown color here. That looks good. Okay. And I think I will, just so it's not so geometric here. We're going to go back to the line layer. I'm going to pull another line off of here where they connect, so it's just not so perfect. So it's got a little bit more to it, something like that. Maybe a couple lines up here like so. Just looked a little too basic for my taste, so I'll just add those in. Like I said, a couple lines going up here. Let's make it a little bit more interesting. Now we're going to go ahead and do those vines. So we're going to go back into that bright green and fill those in. I think I've got an extra line there. What's that go to? That was just a goof. Pull that off real quick. Fill that a little bit in. Okay. And then we'll go ahead and go in with a even brighter green for these leaves. We don't want those to blend in too much to the actual vines themselves. We want those to stand out as separate pieces. So made those a little bit lighter, and I think I might even go back in and make those vines just a tad bit darker, because they are blending in just a little bit still right now. Let's go with this middle color here for the vines. I think that'll, yeah, it makes the leaves pop, but then again here it's a little bit too dark, so maybe we'll just leave them there. Yeah, that's good enough. So, okay, we got one little part of the sky here, and then we will go ahead and start to do the shadows and the highlights. So what we're going to do then is go over to our layers again. We're going to add a new layer. This is going to be our shadow layer, and it's going to be in between our lines and our color flats. And once again, remember the light source is coming from this top direction, so we want everything shadowed to be on the further right hand side. So we'll just kind of start knocking in some of these. I usually start out just with a solid black, get a kind of decent amount done on some certain areas, and then I'll go back in and drop the opacity and start to kind of play around with exactly how light or how dark it should be. And I usually try to get to, like here, a few different colors with the shadows on them so I can see how it affects the different colors. Once we get to the highlights, I've talked about before, I always usually end up doing a couple of highlight layers just because the differences in highlights between different hues are going to show up a lot more different than what the differences between shadows are. So we'll talk about that here in a second. So we're going to go up to our adjustments and drop our opacity down. I think that looks pretty good there. So now once again, all this over here is shadowed, so I'm going to just drop this in. Of course, this is going to fill in the entire thing with shadow, so I've got to erase the left-hand side. But then I also kind of want to add these little highlights along the top. Of course, here I'm not actually adding highlights, I'm just erasing the shadow, so that base color underneath is actually working like the highlight. This kind of just makes the design look a little bit more interesting and three-dimensional. And then you can also, like I said, not going super detailed, but if you want to add, you know, on your lines layer here, you can add a little bit of, you know, accents like this to make it look like the, you know, the bushes have little branches or leaves sticking out of those. And then you can go back in with the highlights and the shadows and do the same thing as well too if you don't want them to be the solid color, the solid outline. But I usually like to use a solid outline because then you can go back in like here with the eraser and kind of make these pop, and it looks a little bit more three-dimensional, and I kind of like the look of that. So once again, I'm going to drop in shadows into this one. I'm going to have to erase everything on this side, since that's where the light source is coming from. And then once again, just kind of want to hit these top areas here. Just break everything up like that. And the same thing here, we'll hit these. And if you mess up, it's kind of nice. You can go just kind of back and forth on here, the eraser and then the black again. Okay, looks good. So now I want to add some shadows over here, like down these leaves. And we'll also add highlights on the top there. As you can see, I'm going pretty quick. I'm not really worrying about it too much, just for the sake of making this, you know, fairly fast video. I'm not making all the lines perfect. So if it takes you longer the first few times, just know I would personally, myself, usually take a little bit longer than this, so don't feel too bad. Let's go ahead and color this part into same thing, erase this side. We can do our erasing here to make those pop a little bit more. Then let's do the back sides of these mountains. We'll be pretty much done with the shadows, I think. Get the underside of this here. Make those flow in together there. So it just kind of builds it up, gives it a little bit of dimension on a, you know, fairly simple cartoony design. It's nice to still have some dimension on there. Makes it a little bit more interesting. I'm going to add the shadows here to the leaves and also to the vines themselves. Pull this in, hit the top of there. Same thing here, this one's going to be on the bottom, but as it goes up towards the top, it's actually going to hit the color or the light source, so we don't want it to go too far. Same thing here, just along this bottom. It's going to give a pretty good shadow onto here. Just do a small shadow here. A couple on the clouds just to build those up a tad bit. So get these leaves here. Should be pretty close then. Let's pull out there and see. A couple more here. Of course, the more elements that you add, the more kind of you've got to do in the long run, but like I said, just building up and having a lot of overlapping elements makes the design look really full and goes a long way in convincing the viewer that it's a, you know, a totally 100% complete design. It's of course a lot better, a lot more interesting to look at than just the cat by itself. So let's shadow down the cap here. And then we also want a shadow actually that the cat itself is giving off here on the ground, so knock that in just pretty basic here, nothing too crazy. Okay, I think that looks pretty good, so let's go ahead and make a new layer then. This is going to be our highlights layer, so we're going to go ahead and select white for our highlights. And same thing here, I'm just going to hit the tops of these. This is one of the lighter color flats that we have going on, this bright green. So it's going to probably get its own highlight layer just because it's going to not show up as well on the dark. So we're going to have to drop the opacity down. And we won't want it really white, we just want it to kind of have that opaque look that lets that green shine through it. But if we put up here, see on this darker green, it's going to look too white on that. So we're going to give all those other ones its own highlight layer and make them a little bit different as far as the opacity goes. So one of the best things to do is just kind of play around with multiple highlight layers just to make sure that everything looks, even though it's cartoon, still believable. Even with you know, cartoons, the light source is still going to be you know, the same as far as how it affects the different parts of the design, and you still want everything to look pretty well done. These in here. Basically, like I said, we're just hitting the light green parts right now. We're not worrying about any of the other greens because we want that different highlight layer. And same thing here, we're going to go over the tops of these. Oops, this is the different green, so we're not going to do that. We're going to go ahead and make a new highlight layer. How about that? So what we're going to do is go back into our darkest green, hit that first, and that's going to be the baseline for how far we drop the opacity down. Let's get it to, say, about right there. Looks good. So now we can just go ahead and hit the tops of these. Basically just like we did on the other side, except over there we were erasing the shadow, and here we're actually adding in the highlight. So same idea, same principle, just kind of backwards. I think those look pretty good. Let's just get these bottom ones here, and that should be it. All right, so there we go. Really quick and simple way that you can add backgrounds to your designs. Kind of walked you through the whole process using just a design that I'd already done. But as you can see, just using basic shapes really goes a long way. Just stacking those designs and those shapes on top of each other can fill in your background really quick and give you a really solid looking design. Alright guys, that's it for today's video. As always, thank you for watching. I appreciate it. If you like today's video, make sure you give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and hit the bell for notifications so you can get alerted when I post new videos. So today's video was all about jungle designs for backgrounds. I know as far as backgrounds go, there are honestly an endless number of different backgrounds that you could do. So I think I might turn this into a video series too, kind of showing you guys some different background techniques that you can use depending on your design. So also, if you have not yet joined, hop on over to Facebook. The group Keep Creating, a Learn, Draw, Share art community is going on over there. The link is in the description below. People are joining, showing off their work, sharing, commenting, meeting new friends. It's awesome. So hop on over after the video and check it out. As far as me, I can be found online, bjdell.com, as well as on Instagram and Twitter at bjdell. So until next time, keep creating.